Okay, good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started, and then I'll turn it over to Denise in just a moment. My name is Betsy Steiner, and I am the Director of Invest in Incredible here at Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Before I introduce our speaker, Denise Roberts, I'd like to make sure that you all are aware of I3Digital, a new electronic platform we launched in response to COVID-19. You'll find all kinds of great articles and links to resources, but most importantly, we've generated a lot of content specific to our nonprofit organizations here in our area, especially for those of you who are starting to return to work, bringing people back into your office or onto your campuses. There's a whole bunch of great information around human resources, policies, practices, as well as fundraising, just like we'll cover today. In addition to electronic resources and webinars, we also have our consulting services available. Typical consulting that you might be familiar with through Invest in Incredible here at Gulf Coast, or if you find that you have a couple of questions or a unique problem or situation that you would like to address, feel free to reach out to us and we can connect you with one of our consultants. Before we get started, I just want to make you aware of a couple of things to know about our webinar. First of all, you may submit questions. Denise Roberts will be answering questions, and all you need to do is use the Q&A that is at the bottom of your screen. If you just toggle near the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. Just click on that and you can submit your questions to us. Denise will pause after every couple of screens to respond to questions that come in. If you happen to get disconnected or need to leave the webinar for any reason, you should be able to use the same link to log back in. And I wanted to make you aware that in addition to taking questions, you'll be able to view this again later, as it will be posted a couple of days after the session runs. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Denise Roberts. She is an I3 consultant and a fundraising professional. Denise has more than 30 years of experience in all phases of fund development, and she specializes in grant writing to private foundations, family foundations, community foundations, as well as governmental entities of all levels, at all levels. She's also experienced in guiding organizations through the accreditation process. Denise advises clients on all phases of development, including annual, capital campaigns, endowment campaigns, planned giving, and major gift solicitation. Denise loves being a grandmother. When she's not busy working with clients, you'll find her reading or doing the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle. Denise, we're grateful for your partnership and leadership on this subject, and we thank all of you participants for the great work that you're doing in the community and for participating today. So with that, Denise, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Betsy. And I also want to thank Linda Roberts from Invest in Incredible. These two women have made this whole thing possible. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get moving. The agenda: where to look for funders and what to look for, what are local and national foundations doing, and what should you and your staff be doing today that will build your grant-seeking capacity. I'm going to come back to this slide. I added 2 slides, and I'm going to come back to 2 if we have time. And if we don't, I think you'll see that what I'm going to now is very, very important. A joint email was sent to everyone in the foundation databases on May 19th, 2020. So that was 2 days ago. The purpose was to gather information to better understand nonprofit recovery plans connected to the COVID-19 virus pandemic. If you look at the right side of the screen, these are all the foundations that participated and will be reviewing your answers to this questionnaire. I just want to say that if I were the executive director of an organization, I would want to share this questionnaire with, at the very least, my board chair. Maybe the executive committee, maybe it's worth it to send out to everyone on the board and have them look at it and give you their thoughts, because these are very important questions. For example, they ask you to list any needs that you may not be able to meet in the near future without immediate funding. You all have needs. I really think you want to answer that question as thoroughly as you can. Do you expect to utilize your operating reserves to meet your budget in the next 6 months? And if you do, what percentage of your operating costs do you expect to be covered by your reserves? This is an important question. It shows that you're digging down to do the best that you can for the people you serve. A very important question is, what new or expanded resources are you pursuing to support your operations during this time? And they give you a checklist. You can check all that apply. Looking for new individual donors, moving current donors to new levels of support, expanded sponsorships, partnering with another organization for administrative support. And then the last choice, the one that you do not want to check, is we do not anticipate needing new or expanded funding at this time. If you check that, you have just told these 7 foundations that you don't need anything. And I don't think that's where you want to go with this. It asks about plans to bring your staff back, plans for your programs. Are you going to maintain everything you had? Are you adding new programs? Are there programs you're cutting as a result of this trying time? Please be sure to answer that. How have you used or expanded technology during the crisis? And they ask what barriers keep you from using or expanding these technologies. If you have any barriers, please be sure to check those off. And a very important question, what technology barriers do your clients have? Again, these may be things the foundations want to help you with, but if you don't answer the question, they won't be able to. You do identify yourself both by the name of your organization and your EIN, your employer identification number. So you can only answer it once. They ask that the ED answers it. And I urge you all to go back through your emails if you missed this. I believe the email came from the Community Foundation. On behalf of all of the foundations. And if by chance you cannot find that email, then I recommend you go to the link I have for the SurveyMonkey survey. Another important thing in just the last several days, Mark Pritchett, CEO of Gulf Coast Community Foundation, had a wonderful article in SRQ Daily. I have the link on the screen, about where he particularly spoke about Gulf Coast and Barancik Foundation's response to the COVID-19 crisis. And one of the key takeaways was he said that the following 5 areas that you see in the brightly colored boxes are going to be the ones that probably need the most support. So, you know, please note that the foundations can't be all things to all people as much as they would like to be. So I believe that he's right, that these are the 5 areas that people are going to want to fund. I think that's true for individual donors as well. Betsy, are there any questions?
At this point, Denise, I'd keep going. We're in good shape. Thank you.
Okay. All righty. What are national foundations doing? I recommend you go to their websites and read their communications. Almost all of the big national foundations have their plan for how to deal with COVID-19. Most large foundations have program officers in each of the areas that are of interest to them. So look for the program officer for your area, social services, arts, education, whatever it might be. A lot of the large foundations are giving emergency COVID-19 grants. The Rockefeller Fund has 20 million set aside for helping organizations up their technology. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, on the other hand, has suspended calls for proposals. I believe that that's because they're waiting to see what will they be most needed for. If you have relationships with national foundations, communicate your activities to them, just as you would with Gulf Coast or the Barancic Foundation or any of our local foundations. What should you be doing now? You should be working on your boilerplate, polishing your case statements or creating case statements if you never have before, and making sure all your files are updated. This is a minimum of what I think you should be including in the boilerplate that you save. Your organization's history. You know, you can, if you have time, I would write a short history, a medium-length history, and a longer history, depending on what the character or word limitations are for each funder to whom you're applying. Take a look at your staff bios and their resumes, their CVs, and their job descriptions. Are these accurate? Do they look good? And really important, try to get them down in length. Often staff resumes run 8 or 10 pages. Get them down to 2 pages. If you can get them down to 1, that's even better. Same with the job descriptions. Collaborations. Be sure that you've written up everyone with whom you collaborate, everyone with whom you have a memorandum of understanding, everyone with whom it's a more casual collaboration. Because now more than ever, I think funders want to see that you are joining with others to solve the problems we have right now. Organizational capacity is a very important section because when the funding committee at a foundation is sitting down and deciding what they're going to fund this year or how much they're going to fund of what they're interested in, they're going to look at the organization's capacity to perform what they said they were going to do in the grant proposal. So this is related to history, but it's a good place to talk about grants you've received before, how successful you were in meeting outcomes, if you had any audits from the funders, what was their report on your performance. Take a look at everything. I wouldn't go back more than maybe 5 years, but I would definitely put that in there. The other things under organizational capacity are what kind of board do you have? How active is the board? What are the board's committees? How often do they meet? What are the board's responsibilities beyond hiring and firing the executive? And then, of course, you want to have a program description for each of your programs. Some of us call that a case statement. At a minimum, your case statement is going to describe the purpose of your program, the population served, where do they live, what are their other demographics, ages, races, socioeconomic standing, abilities versus disabilities or different abilities, that sort of thing. What are the key activities of each of your programs? What do you specifically do? Where do you do it? How often? Anything you can say about that will be important. You'll want your goals and objectives, both short-term and long-term, and those should be our always favorite SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable or achievable, they're realistic or relevant, and they're time sensitive. So each of your goals should say, by such and such a date, X% of whoever these people are will achieve this goal, and you describe the goal. Your program performance and improvement. What does your organization do to look at how you're doing? And do you do a dashboard for each of your programs with a red light or a red dot if you're not meeting your goals, a yellow if you're in danger of not achieving what you said you would achieve, and of course green for those wonderful times that you're achieving exactly what you said you would achieve. So how do you do that? Do you have a committee? Does it go from staff to board? Does the board sit on your program performance committee? Funders will take that seriously because we all in our lives, in everything we do in our lives, have to step back sometimes and say, could I do this better? And maybe talk with other people about how could I do it better? And I think that's something you should really look at. A great thing to do if you're less busy right now because you're not doing special events and certain other things is to gather the most current data on the community need for your program and do that for each one of your programs. And have notations of what the sources were. When you write your grants, be sure to cite your sources throughout, and then have a bibliography at the end that lists them all. Past year accomplishments. If you do an annual report, you probably already have this, but it's a good time to gather what you said you were going to do and what actually happened. And maybe you got an award for the program that you want to put that in. Maybe you found a new partner who enabled you to reach more people, engage more of the community. Maybe you opened a new location, and how many more people were you able to serve? And how did that new location add to the spread of your work? Betsy, is there anything?
Yes, we've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first one is about the case statement.
Mm-hmm.
And as it relates, is the case statement intended to be for what you're able to deliver during this COVID era, or what you could normally deliver in a pre or post-COVID atmosphere?
That's a great question. I like to think that we're going to be looking ahead. So when I say to get your case statements together, I think that's for grants you're going to be applying for as this crisis eases up. That's what I would look at. If you did something amazing within a program to address the COVID virus, I would absolutely put that in there. It's newsworthy.
Great. Thanks, Denise. We have another question, and this one is about collaboration. And the question is, When you mention collaboration in a grant application, does the collaboration need to be specific to the grant application, or could it be another form of collaboration that you're doing elsewhere in your organization or with another program?
I think that there are two places where you'll talk about collaborations. One would be who you're collaborating with on the specific program for which you're applying. And the other would be how your collaborations strengthen your organization's capacity to get a grant, implement a grant, succeed, and report.
Great, thank you, Denise.
Oh, let me just say one more thing. Another place that you want to be looking at is how collaborations are building what you do. There's no point in collaborating if it doesn't do anything. But if you're collaborating with the health department and as a result, you're able to provide vaccines to 800 people a month, that's a really important thing to put in there. So how much has it really expanded your reach? Your files. It's a great time to get your files together. And every year you want to keep a computer file that has your 501c3 letter, also known as an IRS determination letter, your board list, the current board, and you might want that in a couple of different formats. Some funders just ask for the name of the board members, their office on the board, and often who they work for. Others want their email addresses or their actual home addresses. I would keep it in two formats, the streamlined one and the very detailed one. Your latest audit. Sometimes you have to upload the audit. You might want to get on your computer and reduce the size through Adobe Acrobat. And if you don't know how to do that, check to see if someone in your office does, because they're so long and detailed, and sometimes you can only upload so many bytes, megabytes, or whatever the bytes are, and you want to get that audit condensed, electronically condensed. It doesn't take out any of the information. It just makes it a smaller file. Your Form 990, your annual operating budget, every funder is going to ask for that as an attachment. Your state registrations with the Department of Consumer Affairs, which is under the Department of Agriculture, and your certificate of good standing with the Florida Department of State. I'm going to add on the budget issue, when you're doing your case statements for each of your programs, you should also be doing, you should have your latest budget for each program. You're going to be asked for that in every application. And then the boilerplate that you put together before, have that in that folder, and you will be able to zip through some of the smaller applications by having all these things at hand, and they'll help you get through the bigger ones that you might struggle a bit more with. But grant writing is not that tough. What you want to do is look at the question they're asking, answer the question, which will usually have 2 or 3, sometimes 5 or 6 parts to it, and make sure you're answering every single one. And that's the key. Pay attention. Also, watch your deadlines. Get things drafted early so that whoever's going to be the ultimate arbiter of whether this gets sent in or not has a chance to review it thoroughly. And these are the 5 things beyond what is the program you're applying for. These are the 5 areas that virtually every application will ask you about. What are your expected results, your impact? How do you measure them? And that's a question to be answered in a couple of different ways, and you want to give them the more the better with measurement. Everybody wants you measuring these days because money is scarce, and they want to give the money to people who will use it most wisely. So measurement is both what tools do you use and how often do you administer the measurement, and who administers the measurement. And is this a measurement that is universally acknowledged as a good measurement for whatever your program is? Is this just something that you do in-house, which is fine. You can have in-house measurements, but you better explain which ones are evidence-based and measurable in that way against a standard, and which ones you're doing internally. They're going to ask for your budget. It will almost always include a question about what other funding have you already received for the program? What other funding are you seeking for the program? There aren't a lot of funders who want to fund your whole thing, because if they go away, will the program go away? If there are individual donors, some other foundations, maybe a government grant that's helping to keep this program alive, that looks better. If one foundation drops out, you're not going to stop serving your consumers. Organizational capacity, we already talked about that. That's almost always a question. And attachments. This is why I want you to keep a nice clean file, get rid of last year's board list so you don't get confused. Everything up to date that you think a funder might ask for, so you don't have to go digging for it, particularly if it's at the last minute. What can you and your board do during this time? Well, one thing you can do, we already talked about, you can work together on filling out that questionnaire for the 7 foundations. Review your mission. Now, don't change your mission to chase grants. But if it doesn't meet what you currently do, it might be a good time for a board retreat. You can do it by Zoom, and get into looking at how could the mission better state what your goals are and why you're important to the community. Keep it brief, but make sure it covers what you do. But do some visioning now. What would you aspire to do to respond to COVID-19 and the community's current and emerging needs? What would you do to build the health of your organization in these difficult times? And you might want to include that visioning in your proposals. That's essentially what they're asking for in the questionnaire from the 7 foundations. What are your plans for bringing back employees? What are your plans for your programming? What are your plans for finding more funding sources? How about doing a COVID-19 statement? What my organization is doing differently to meet our mission. And many of the foundation websites, they have their COVID-19 statement of what they envision doing, what they hope to accomplish, what they're focusing on, and how they can come out of this strong and healthy. And I hope you can do that as well. Okay, now I'm going to go back because we do have a little bit of time. Betsy, while I'm going back, can you tell me if there are any questions?
Yes, we've got a question about what This is about finding grants kind of during this COVID time. What are the best ways to identify other COVID grant opportunities outside of our local area or our local community foundations? Do you have any suggestions for that?
What a wonderful question, because that's what I'm going back to.
Excellent.
I paid that person to ask that. Okay, wait, gotta go back where I was. How do you find the funders? There are a number of ways to look for funders. I like the Chronicle of Philanthropy. They do some online databases broken down by, and these are free. They do, they'll send you an email that they have new funding to announce, not from them, from foundations all over the country. And they break them down so you can go to arts or health or education, whichever one you're interested in. And I think those come out about every week. Paid search engines, that is what I use. I use Foundation Directory Online. You have to pay a lot of money every year to get Foundation Directory Online. It's, I just paid $1,800, so it's not cheap. But it is so comprehensive. You can put in keywords. You can put in anything you want, and it will search in, I don't know, thousands of different ways. If you see where I have in blue there, similar organizations, one of the things I like to suggest to my clients, or that I do for my clients, is let's say you run a children's after-school program. And you know all the other organizations in town that run children's after-school programs. You can put in who funded Susan's after-school program, and you'll see all the grants that were made to Susan's program, and you might want to do some research into those foundations that have been funding her and apply to them for your organization. Similarly, back in the old days, I would go online to an organization similar to mine and look for their annual report. And annual reports usually have a list of donors. I start with the bigger money, of course, and look to see within that bigger money, what are the foundations that are funding Susan's after-school program. So that's a kind of an old-fashioned way to do it, but it sure works. Sign up for any e-news you can. If there's maybe a professional organization that will sometimes email you funding opportunities, take a look at where they got them, go to that source, and sign up to get the e-news. You can try Google. Can't hurt. Many, many more foundations have websites now than did even 2 or 3 years ago. I think everybody thinks they need a website, and they probably do. So I would try that. But be sure to, if you want any more specific answers to your question about where to go, please let Betsy know through the Q&A. I would recommend you go to the local foundation websites and read their communications. I think I'm being a little redundant with that, but do they have emergency COVID-19 grants? If you have a need for an emergency grant, what are you going to apply for? And get that written. As with any type of donor, it's all relationship building. So if you're not going to ask for something during COVID-19, just let your foundations know what you're doing without asking for a dime. maybe you've got some photos of the kids in the after school program who unfortunately can't be in the program now, but look at the fun they were having in November. This is when they did their Thanksgiving pageant or their pumpkin patch party in October. Send some photos. How many kids got to do it? What were some of the quotes from the kids? You know, all the kids want to thank XYZ Foundation. Little Becky said, I got the biggest pumpkin ever. You know, they want to hear fun things. How to initiate an email or letter or phone call. I don't know if the foundation reps out there would agree with me, but I think a phone call is pretty bold. I wouldn't start with a phone call unless I knew the program officer or the CEO, whoever it is I'm contacting, very, very well. I would do an email. I would love to talk with you about this project we're thinking of doing. And is there a good time for me to call you, or would you prefer to call me? Is there something we can set up? Another thing, when you do send the email or make the phone call or write a letter, does anyone do that anymore? I don't know. But some people like to get them. Start out thinking about the other person. How are you doing during the COVID-19 crisis? How are you able to keep all your staff on, and is everybody working from home? And any tips on what we should be doing while we're working from home? And then segue into, and by the way, I want money. No, don't say it that way, obviously, but then you get into that part of the message. Yeah.
Denise, if you have a moment, I've got a question I'd like to share.
Okay.
One of our participants was curious about the foundation directory online, and certainly there's an expense to that. We know that some libraries offer it for free, and actually we think the closest one is in Tampa. Sarasota Community Foundation has also made access to it available. Do you know if the Sarasota Community Foundation still does that?
You know, I apologize for forgetting to mention that. I haven't used it in a long time because I started buying it a number of years ago, but I would call there and or send an email. I can't tell you who to send it to. I used to know who ran it, and I don't know anymore. But if they do, it's a wonderful resource.
And I believe that they've made it accessible for quite some time, but I do think, and maybe what we can do is find out if there is a way to access it, you know, during this unusual period of, you know, not having the ability to actually go into the foundation. So,
and I know the Selby Library had it for years, but I don't believe they do anymore.
That's correct. They do not. So the closest one, I believe, is Tampa. So we'll make a point of sending that out in a communication following the webinar.
That's great. I came back to this slide because I want to make sure that you're all looking in your emails for the one sent on May 19th. That was Tuesday, 2 days ago. It's really important. And I want you to take a look at this again. You can simply Google SRQ Daily and then look for the May 16th article that Mark Pritchett wrote. It's very helpful. And with that, I want to take questions.
Okay, I think we are in good shape. Let's see here. We have 2 more questions. The Community Foundation has partnered with local libraries, and it sounds like you can get the password from the library now while the libraries are closed. So we are going to take a look at how to access this, and like I said, we'll be sure to send it out in a communication. So and I think, unless there are any other questions, I think that's it for now.
I have one more thing that I forgot to say earlier that I wanted to make a big point of. In the questionnaire, they ask, have you been meeting with like organizations to talk about what you're doing during this crisis? What are they doing? What are you doing? Are there things you could do together? And the next question after you answer yes or no to that is, would your organization be interested in participating in a work group or additional work groups? I strongly recommend that you answer yes. I have a feeling that these foundations are going to be offering probably some Zoom or other online work groups. And as has been said by so many people, all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And I think you want to show your willingness to reach out to other organizations. There's another question in here about, have you worked with another organization to reduce your administrative costs during the coronavirus? And I know that many people in the community shudder at how many nonprofits there are in the greater Sarasota, Manatee, Charlotte, Tri-County region, hundreds and hundreds. I believe about 700 participated in the Giving Challenge. It's huge. Could any of those people maybe share an accountant or a bookkeeper? Would that reduce costs? Would that also clear out a desk so when you all come back to work, you can socially distance? Maybe there's a way you could share a grant writer. You could share a special events person once, you're planning your special events now, even though you can't hold them. Maybe there are people who could share some of those back office duties. Maybe you could combine with a few other organizations to get some sort of contract with a printer where you'll all save money if you all send your printing there. Of course, you're going to want to get 3 bids minimum from the different printers and see who comes back with the best plan. But I think the foundations are going to be looking at who's working smarter, because that's what we all have to do during this pandemic.
You make a really important point, Denise. Some organizations are fearful that they might lose funding if they collaborate, because sometimes in collaboration there are synergistic savings. But your point is so well taken that funders actually look for organizations that collaborate to be more efficient and more effective, for sure. So, and that ties into an earlier question about grant writing and sharing how you are collaborating, whether it's specific to the program that you're working on or elsewhere in your organization. So,
yeah, if you can show that you have streamlined administrative costs, however you do that, it might be a collaboration with a for-profit entity. It doesn't have to be a not-for-profit, but if you've come up with a way to reduce those non-direct service costs, the funders are going to love your ingenuity, your creativity, and your willingness to work with others.
Denise, thank you so much for your time today and your expertise on this subject.
Thank you.
If anyone has further questions generally, or specific to the information that Denise has covered today, please feel free to reach out to us at
Let me
i3@gulfcoastcf.org.
go to that.
And with that, I think we're going to close out for today, but thank you all for your participation. Denise, thank you so much for putting this together for us, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Betsy. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everybody.